All right, so this is a very, very interesting panel because this panel will explore the voices of the airwaves, right? So different radio personalities who basically, what I believe is that radio, especially in Africa, plays such a huge role in terms of representation, in terms of getting news out, and it's such an important element. I mean, I grew up on radio, and now suddenly there's podcasts. So the whole idea of the airwaves is shifting so much. So we're going to have a beautiful panel who are going to explore radio and podcasts in the now, okay? So our moderator is Sai Jones, and she will introduce the rest of the panel. I hope I did that justice. Alrighty.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Sanbonani Molweni. I hope everybody's good today. So I would like to take this time to just say hello, good morning, and to thank you for coming and joining us on this conversation here today, which has been entitled Voices of the Airwaves. Today we've got a panel of people, broadcasters, and myself, a podcaster, on-air host, and we're going to talk about the direction as to where we see broadcast going in Africa and kind of assessing what that means in the new age of things, the new technology of things. So I don't want to waste too much time because we have to pack this up in 40 minutes, and I'm going to ask my panel to come up, and I'm just going to quickly, briefly introduce them as we have the conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got Mzi Kaka, we've got Samantha Mogwe, and we've got Kutlwano Nhlabo, aka the Kruk. Please join me, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So I did say briefly that we're going to be talking about the direction as to where the airwaves are going. And just quickly want to let you know who exactly is here joining us tonight. We've got the Kruk right here. The Kruk is an on-air personality for Drums Radio currently, DJ, producer, all-round influential gent. Hi, the Kruk.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm good. Great to be here, second year in a row. And yeah, let's
Awesome.
hash it out.
Awesome. And then I've got Samantha Mogwe right there. She's a musician, she's an artist, and you know what? Just getting to know her has been so amazing. She's also an on-air personality on Gabs FM. Samantha Mogwe, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Quite excited.
Yes, lovely, actually. And then we've got Mzi Kaka, former Metro FM Top 40 technical producer, currently on Star FM, and also he's a lecturer of broadcast radio at the Academy of Sound Engineering. Mzi Kaka, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, you're making me sound far more esteemed than I actually am.
Oh, your throne, sir.
I want to beforehand apologize if I sound a bit elliptic. I might be buffering because I got little to no sleep, and I blame it on the Africa Rising Music Conference. I've been super excited. And of course, couldn't get any shut-eye because of that.
That's understandable. Welcome. Before I actually go on to that, I nearly forgot to introduce myself. Damn. My name is Sai Jones. My name is Sai Jones. I am a founder of an online dance music platform called the Sai Sessions, which houses an event, a blog, and a podcast. And here, I guess I am here on the title of a podcaster and joined by these broadcasters here today. So you know where I needed us to start this conversation, because we only have 40 minutes to pack this in. We only have 40 minutes. I needed us to talk about the kind of changes and the kind of shifts that we've noticed in the broadcasting space. And I understand, the Kruk, you've done radio for over 10 years now, and you guys also same. What kind of shifts have we noticed from then now concerning broadcast radio? And I'm going to start with you, Miss Samantha, because you're already ready.
So I've been on radio since 2018, so that's give or take 6 years. Gabs FM started in the evening, night slot, from like 8 till midnight. So I was getting home at 1 a.m. midweek, and then they moved me to their prime time slot, 12 till 3 p.m., so yeah, it's been 6 years. And during those 6 years, there's been a lot that's gone on, including COVID. including COVID and a lot of changes along the way. And I can only speak from my personal experience and conversations that I've had with people who work on other radio stations and what they do. So during those years of, first of all, being a consumer of radio, I realized that there was a lot of traditional elements that came to play. I didn't even know what our radio personalities looked like before, because there was very little interaction on social media. It wasn't really a big thing. But over the course of the few years that I've been on radio, I'm seeing that my radio station and others are really pushing into like a digital space of trying to integrate traditional radio mediums with your social media, your digital platforms. And I guess also that's part of the whole thing of it's either you adapt or die. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of radio stations that are struggling to integrate that are losing out on commercial space, they're losing out on brand value, they're losing out on a lot of aspects that make radio pop in the, you know, in this previous current time. So it's been a change. Digital space, social media, digital platforms. That's the shift that I've seen.
Okay, and then what about you, Kruk?
I think, obviously, I concur with what you say from an internal perspective, but I think externally, the listener has also changed, you know? How they consume the medium, what they want to hear, what they're exposed to outside of radio, and what makes a good platform for them, you know? And I don't think a lot of traditional radio stations have actually caught up to the times, you know? We're actually chatting backstage that imagine if you paid a subscription to your Spotify and there was an influencer after every 3 songs trying to tell you or talk about where to buy bread, or there's an advert, and it's kind of annoying, you know? And I think that's where our listeners are. And so radio needs to reshape what content is and what valuable content is, and see how you can get ears glued to the speakers based on what content people want to hear from the announcer, you know? Because, I just think the listener has literally got the world at their feet, and traditional radio is failing to basically play to the listener's game.
Yeah, what about Mzi?
Sure, I think I would echo both sentiments shared. I would say, without question, the advent of social media or the advent of digital, should I say, has made the biggest impact on radio over the past 5 to 10 years or so. And I think what that has resulted in, again, to echo the Kruk Kutlwano's point, traditional radio, conventional radio hasn't quite as yet caught up to the reality of where radio finds itself currently. And I'm going to speak in terms of thinking of radio as an additional content platform and not merely a radio station per se. All right, because we are now in a period where, for the longest time, there is a narrative that radio is dying because of these, but I would like to believe that it can coexist. All right, there can be a symbiotic relationship. And when I say thinking of radio as yet another content platform, we are finding, for example, certain radio stations will no longer have what we would traditionally call program managers or program directors, but content managers. And that really speaks to how the content you're creating for broadcast can translate into digital, can translate visually, and things of that sort. These are where we are in terms of headspace. If you're on the cutting edge of radio, I would say it's very important to see it that way. The different iterations of the content that is created for broadcast via the various mediums that are available now, these will not necessarily speak to each other at all times. There are instances where you will have content exclusively for digital and some exclusively for broadcast, and then there are instances where they will speak to each other per se. But to see some radio stations awakening to that is really interesting. And surprisingly enough, I'm finding that this is happening in West and East Africa in particular. If I take a look at Kiss FM Kenya, I take a look at Wasafi FM in Tanzania, their social media accounts, how they are just creating content which is almost exclusive for their social media followers that you would not hear broadcast ordinarily. Yet on the other hand, we're also seeing the same trends in South Africa, where you're seeing there is what we call theater of the mind, right? Where you are just helping to create pictures and images in the mind of the listener. Then you are actually displaying them on your socials. Like if you're speaking about a guest coming in, we have set up a red carpet experience for them. Oh, you should really see, this is amazing. Like YFM, for example, had Bonang about a week or two ago. And then on their socials, the follow-up to that was the actual footage of the event, etc. It's a double-edged sword because the theater of the mind is sacred and a cornerstone to radio. Yet, in reality, if you are catering to the current content consumption habits, as Kutlana has alluded, you will have to include that into your content offering as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're essentially all on the same page about this. And I completely agree with you guys as well, because I feel like for me, the new age, the new technology of things is an extension. That's how I feel. It can be used as an extension. And like you said, that now radio should be seen as a content producer, like content production situation, as opposed to a separate entity. I'm on the same page as that I feel like being a podcaster, if I can put it out there, being a podcaster, I've always seen my podcast as an extension to what is happening in music, let me say, because radio is always one of the first platforms to drop music. So when I go on my podcast, I now I'm extending what's happening on radio when it comes to the musical artists that I introduced on radio. Now I'm extending it. And I agree with everything that you guys are saying. But now what I'm wondering is, in your various radio station, where you work at Drums, where you work at Gabs, and where you work at Star right now, are we seeing the change that we want to see? Are we seeing it in your various radio stations? Now you can take it back home, and Gabs FM can start because you're all the way in another country, ma'am.
You guys are going to get me into trouble. But okay, let me be honest. Yes and no. Yes and no. I'm a big believer that whenever there's change in specific radio stations, and ours is a private radio station, it usually starts at the top, right? So if your board of directors doesn't quite get where the trends are going, it becomes a bit difficult to convince. But in our case, we've got a few people fighting the cause for us. And over time, we've seen certain things being implemented. It's only 2 years ago that they got a social media aggregator and a content producer. And that's something that we had been speaking on, right? Because we are aware of the trends and consumer behavior and how it's changed. And, it's getting there, but hopefully quicker rather than later. I know they're also including within when it comes to paid advertising space, they also are linking that to the social media platforms. So our clients who come through paying for radio ads can also pay for an extension onto the Gabs FM social media platforms, and everybody wins. Greater reach, more money for the radio station. So that's why I'm saying yes and no. One thing that we're still kind of fighting about is the idea of podcasting. Some on-air presenters have taken it upon themselves to incorporate the two, but it's still a bit of a battle to have your live streaming while you are on air, but also have a camera crew that's in studio to to get everything that's happening behind the scenes, because like you said, our consumers have changed and they want to see the bit of the chaos that's happening. You know, it's a theater of the mind. They want to hear, but they also want to see, and they want to be able to see like 2 hours later when you're done with your show. So we're getting there. Yeah.
Okay, you already, sir.
Well, mine's going to be very short because 2 stations that I've worked at where this has presented fairly different scenarios. So at Star, it is a youth station, at least initially. Upon conception and inception, it was a youth station, so social media had to be a big part of the station's promotion. However, there were restricted resources. And with the restriction of resources, presenters, we had to take it upon ourselves, it was incumbent upon ourselves to leverage our social media presence to try and draw attention to the station, and that would include perhaps regular posts. Of course, IG Live is, as if we're talking the basics, IG Live for an interview, and trying to promote, you know, the usual hashtags and things of the sort. Then at Hot 1027, we're also going halfway there because it has a lot to do as well with who your target listener is, the demographic. So at Hot, you're talking about 44 plus or 40 plus. These people are not as active on social media. You'll find that, as they're calling it right now, the old people's app, Facebook, is perhaps the best place to push content for that particular demographic. But for the most part, those are very traditional listeners. They grew up, say, in the 80s and 90s listening to radio, and they like to keep it that way. They still enjoy the theater of the mind aspect, for example, and are not, though they enjoy visuals and things of that nature, they are more so still very much primarily about the music than they are about personalities and things of that sort. So we'll find that on socials, our offering definitely is not nearly as big in terms of sales, at least, as the on-air offerings. If you look at the rate cards, I won't go into that and all, but they're quite far off from each other, I would say. Perhaps with time, as we have a younger generation moving up into the 40s, we might see the needle move with respect to that. But at the moment, it's very basic. It might be an outside broadcast promotion, just announcing where we're going to be, where you can find and engage with the station in person, things of that nature.
And Kruk, I understand that with you, the dynamic is super different because you're remote. And so I would assume that they really take a huge advantage of the technology and the Internet of Things. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so in the 4 radio stations that I've worked at, starting at YFM, it was very traditional, also very youth-focused. I remember, I think in 2015, I pitched something called Y Uncut because I could start seeing this podcasting thing becoming a thing, you know? And they obviously didn't see it. And you can tell now that they're trying to fast forward, you know what I mean? And play catch up, you know? And one of the reasons why, after having my 10-year spell at Y, I decided to look for an overseas radio job was because of the fact that people were just comfortable with being traditionalists, you know? I hear what you're saying about Hot 102, you know what I mean? Those guys are 44, and that's cool, you know, but for an ever-growing and an ever-growing youth brand, you constantly need to be on the pulse of what culture is doing and where culture is, you know? And when I got a job in the UK at Drums Radio and at Dash Radio in LA, I could basically be DJing somewhere in Scandinavia, but I can still do my radio show. And one thing that has taught me is that as long as there is value in your content, as long as you don't timestamp your links, then that content is forever, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what I've found value in, and I think that's why people like myself are still in the business of radio.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the one thing I remember we were talking backstage, and I did say that for me, the one thing that I do miss. One thing that I do miss as a podcaster, I have to catch everybody else's information. What everybody has to say to me, I have to catch it post, and I don't want that. You know, I enjoy the liveness of things, and I find that element is the one up that broadcast has. For me, that's how I feel. That is the only one up. I want to be able to interact with these people in real time. I don't know if that's something you guys are opposing or against or for. You have an opinion on that? She's shaking her head. Clearly, she has a different opinion. And you also, Mzi?
I totally agree. Yeah. It's one of the first points I raise whenever someone tries to raise the argument that podcasts are going to kill radio, so to speak. I speak about that real-time live interaction that podcasts can't offer, because we know that one of the greatest value offerings or propositions of radio is what some of us call companionship. The fact that you can have real-time interaction and thus a real-time relationship with the personality on air. The immediacy of radio is a huge advantage that it has over podcasts, or as we call them, on-demand. Something huge happens, a significant event happens, whether it be current affairs or in music. Maybe your podcast drops once a week, every Thursday. It happens on a Monday. Of course, radio personalities can already begin to dissect that immediately, etc. And you, on the other hand, are probably just echoing what has already been shared, or trying to deliver a different angle of some sorts. And then in addition to that, I would also say, though I won't get into it quite right now, the locality of radio. It's different when it comes to Gutwan, of course. He's an exception, and that's a rather interesting position he finds himself in. It would be nice to hear him delve into that, catering to a global market almost, rather than a specific localized listenership per se. But those two are the biggest advantages, I'll say, terrestrial radio has over on-demand audio.
I'd like to beg to differ.
Let's go.
I think technology has allowed people and podcasting to still have that interaction. One, look at a podcast like McG. You know, he'll take voice notes, he'll take calls. You know, and yes, it might not have that. I might not say something now, and you comment now, but how he packages it, because he comes from a radio background, will make it sound like it's something that's happening now. One. Two, I think the only form of radio that still feeds off the now is probably talk radio, because of the frequency at which news breaks. But for music radio, commercial radio, I really do not see the value, because the fact that if I'm an artist and I'm going to release a hit song, and I say the song is out on Friday, you've already got it on your Spotify, but your radio compiler will start playlisting the song in the next 2 weeks. So what value are you giving me? You know? And I think the other thing is the fact that if you want to create an appointment with your listener, you can obviously do that on platforms like YouTube. You know, like you can do a podcast today and say the podcast is going to be out at 5 today, and still the listener would have watched that podcast for the first time at 5 when you want them to watch it. So I really think that there's a lot that radio needs to do in terms of catching up. And I foresee radio contracts having a podcast clause in the very near future that, yes, you might have this platform on this traditional radio station, but your contract also holds you to be doing a podcast that can feed off what you're talking about on air, you know?
Yeah.
And also, we need to look at the fact that airtime is not a currency anymore. Data is, you know? A lot of people will walk into a shop and buy data bundles and not airtime. So that means that the engagement that is happening on air is mostly voice notes, is mostly tweets, is mostly messages through whatever apps that they've got or whatever communication platforms that they've got to speak to you, but not the conventional phone call, unless it's talk radio. That's the only form of radio that I've found is still adhering to the traditional norms. But everything else is happening on podcast.
I love that you went into mentioning the artist, and this is something I've been thinking about in terms, and I'm playing devil's advocate here. I'm a podcaster, I'm mainly based online.
All right.
So the one thing I was thinking about here is one of the benefits of radio, especially music-based radio stations, the fact that artists get paid through they get paid royalties, you get me? So that's a major benefit that I've seen also comes with the radio and as a broadcasting platform, as broadcast itself. So now my main concern is if we, and my opinion is also that how radio and broadcast is now consumed has changed. It's the same as how you guys all see it. So now my thing is that if we now solely take this direction of being a digital age, I'm worried about the artist, but that's just something that's in my mind. Am I weird? But
Yeah. Well, that's a problem worldwide. It's,
worldwide, okay.
I
I think that might just be a conversation for another day, the Kruk.
I think the internet has leveled the playing field, We also need to realize that the compilers at radio stations are playlist things that they like or that they feel could work for the radio stations, but not what's hot, I remember working at YFM and there were so many hot songs out there that Y needed to look to the internet to start playlisting,
Yeah.
So that paradigm has changed, These kids and artists have found a cool ways to use social media, data, and the internet to create their own buzz, and radio becomes a byproduct, Think of the last time you've seen an artist post that my song was #1 on the top 40.
I recently saw an MTV bass one.
Yes, but you'll see artists posting that I'm on the Spotify playlist. I've gone, my streams have gone this much, and my music has reached this far, So I think that's where it's shifted to. So radio really needs to be introspective in the business model and in the content that they're giving to the listener, and shouldn't be shy to go to the content creators, be artists, be organic content creators, be YouTubers, and so on and so forth, and say, we'll actually pay you to license authentic content to us so that we're still the first at releasing it before you actually put it in the public domain.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's a very
point,
valid
actually.
point. Very good. I will say, it's something I wanted to raise a few moments ago. I think it's important that we also take into consideration the socio-economic context of South Africa. So that is definitely what Kutlwana is talking about, is the future, which we should be at right now, perhaps already. And there is the something to factor in is we're working with people. And unfortunately, that's where the discrepancy lies, human discretion. You could have one compiler who is on the pulse, who is checking the playlist on the iTunes, the Spotifys, the titles, etc., and another who's just going with personal taste. When they go to a party, what are they hearing, and things of that nature. But back to the socioeconomic question, it's very important to take that into consideration as far as a matter such as data cost. Data is a lot cheaper now than it was a few years ago. However, there are still
In
those...
South Africa.
In South Africa.
South Africa.
You know what I'm saying? It is still very much an impediment for some to fully engage, to fully make that digital migration, so to speak. So in light of that, I wouldn't say radio is still the primary promotional channel, but it is still a very significant promotional channel in South Africa, depending on which SEM, as we refer to it, we're speaking to, and it is still very much the primary promotional channel for some. It is the first point of exposure for a lot of people when it comes to hearing music.
So what are we saying now then? What are we saying in terms of ideally where we want to see our broadcast going? What are we saying we want to see that will work? Because what I'm hearing from everybody here and is the fact that we just need to be able to look at the market space and cater accordingly. So what are we saying we want to see? What are we saying is, what are we forecasting concerning broadcast radio? Broadcast, actually.
I think broadcast is a young man's sport, man, you know. It is. Broadcast is a very young man's sport because I don't care which radio station you represent, but you're going to need to fold to adhere to what the kids are doing. Like you were saying about Hot with the 44 plus old listenership that have got Facebook and so on and so forth. But they see value on having a presence on social media. True. Because it's not really about what they communicate, but it's also good for revenue. The more numbers you've got, the more you can sell that space as an extension of the radio station. So it's a very young man's sport, and I really feel that the people that are running radio stations or are at the fort of making really, really, really impactful decisions on radio stations are either fundis and not radio people, or are very old.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, Sam?
I mean, I could 100% agree with that. We were talking about that, actually.
Yeah, backstage we were actually talking about how, unfortunately, the people who are making decisions are Bogreni, and they don't quite understand the direction in which the digital space is playing when it comes to radio. But I would like to see all radio stations integrating, or at least starting. To what degree, I'm not quite sure. But even if you're integrating more Facebook, more podcasting, at least start somewhere.
Yeah. And just almost unrelated, something worth thinking about as to why this is happening. There's also a little known trend that DSPs are in fact recruiting radio program directors and compilers to assist them with their perhaps target campaigns. If you think about it, a target user is pretty much kind of like a target listener of some sort. So it's interesting that they are recruiting from radio to assist them with whether it be the compilation of the playlists or just understanding how to tailor their music, what they promote in particular regions, etc.
Okay, bigger question. Is radio dead?
No.
No.
And we're about to actually take questions from the floor right now. I see everybody's heated.
Yes, radio is dead.
No.
It is not. I beg to differ.
Okay. I do want to take questions right now, and I think we still have the time. We're right on time. Awesome. So we're going to take a couple of questions, and I believe in questions, ladies and gentlemen. All right, let me start to the front here.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
So my name is Michi Zambia Sweetheart. I am one part of a show called The Breakfast League on Phoenix FM in Zambia, which is one of the biggest private-owned radio stations in Zambia. My question is actually for the Kruk. I'm curious. I have a lot of questions, but I would like to hear more details on how you actually got to work on radio beyond your country of origin. Because, for example, in my country, in Zambia, you have, according to the labor laws or something, to work in broadcasting, you have to prove that you cannot find talent within the country to take that position. So it's kind of hard to have people from other countries on broadcasting channels, unless otherwise. There has to be reasons roundabout some way. So how did you find yourself on radio?
I think everything is about leverage, man. When you walk into a business meeting, the first thing that you sell is what you don't have. I mean, what you have that other people don't have, you know? I was lucky enough to tap into the Amapiano sound in 2014 and started calling the DJs like from everybody. Like these guys were nobodies. The global superstars that you see now were nobodies, and used to give them money to come to studio because that was the bubbling sound. Every time I'd go to a gig, the warm-up sound used to be Amapiano, but the very melodic Amapiano, without the log drum, and I'd find that every time that we, people that are on radio or the so-called headliners, start DJing, the party would dip because this sound was organically growing in different corners of South Africa. So I decided to put this thing on radio, had a segment called Amapiano Hour, and that became my thing. So every time I spoke or presented myself to either a Dash radio in LA, the Beat 103.6 FM in London, or Drums Radio, was the fact that I'm the first guy to play Amapiano on radio. And that's what I bring to the table. I think the issue with the current climate of everything, you know, is that because we consume social media and we see a person doing this and is getting 20,000 likes, playing the same songs on their reel, we think that is actually the formula. And then you actually go through your feed and you end up finding 200 things that have got the same song, that look the same way, the people look the same, and they speak alike, you know? And how do you create leverage of that? So that's my thing, is that the difference is actually the difference.
Hello, everyone. My name is Liseli, a.k.a. Lady Light. I just want to ask you guys, radio in South Africa and Botswana, are you guys promoting music from outside your countries? Are you guys playing music from all over the continent, or are you restricted to just playing maybe hits from other countries and your local music? What does it take for artists, let's say from Namibia, Angola, Central African Republic, Sudan, to be playlisted, and how do compilers actually select their music? This is also just in the interest of African unity. How do we get our artists on radio? I know South African radio, you play a lot of South African music, but growing up in Zambia, I listened to a lot of South African music on Zambian radio. I listened to a lot of West African music on Zambian radio. I was introduced to legends like Hugh Masekela, Brenda Fassie, Salif Keita, on Zambian radio. So I just want to hear your opinion on that, and how do we do this? How do we grow as artists from our region, especially our region? How do I put my music on Metro, on 5FM, on Hot FM?
For us, it has to do with the regulations. So right now in Botswana, the regulation is the local airplay has to be 55% local, and it's still growing. So whatever broadcaster, whatever radio station, TV, etc., has to make sure that there's a 55-45 ratio. And that's so that we can try and boost the economy back at home when it comes to royalty payments. Do all broadcasters follow that? Not quite, because because then the whole issue of some broadcasters will say it has to do with quality control. That's always the excuse, quality control. But I hear you about, you know, making sure that we are diversifying what we play. I'm also an artist, so I know how difficult it is to get your music on radio stations across the board. So I put my neck on the line and I communicate with, you know, people with interesting sounds, and I talk to our music compilers, and we have certain features that cater for, let's say, we'll say a top 5 of music coming out from Tanzania. And that's how we find a way to playlist music that would not necessarily playlist on our radio station.
Yeah. I would say pretty much the same. I think it has to do with mainly 3 things: regulation, and commercial objectives, as well as the format of the station, so to speak. For example, at Star 919, it's in fact a community station, and the regulation states you gotta be at least 70% local. So we're gonna be pushing a whole lot of local talent. Anything outside of that has to be deemed somewhat exceptional. And unfortunately, that's going to see the megastars, international megastars from the United States, Europe, the UK, and of course there are African superstars though featured, your Burna Boys, Davidos, etc. It's unlikely that we will be playlisting mid-tier African artists like an up-and-coming one. Might be hot, but if there isn't much demand for them or traction behind them as yet, it's unlikely you'll hear them. Format as well plays a role. You will hear, but I'll mainly see this in online, that some stations do definitely prioritize what they might call blackness or African sounds, and will therefore make an effort to mine African music and things of the sort. A huge advocate for that on commercial radio right now, in fact, is DJ Sabi. You know, he's been a voice for African music, and he makes a point of advocating for African talent and exposing the listener to not only the megastars, but up-and-coming talent in that regard. And then commercial objectives, of course, being that you want your listenership to grow so that you can the valuation of your airtime can spike, right? So you're going to basically give the people what they want, unfortunately. And what they don't know, they don't want, but perhaps it's more so because they don't know about it, they don't want it. But there are very few people in management and radio today willing to take that chance. It really takes a champion of any particular cause or genre working at a station to see to it that it makes inroads into playlist and mass consciousness, so to speak.
I'd like to just quickly give you a cheat code. So don't directly go to the radio station and submit your music. Find the DJ that does a specialty music show, because those guys have the power to actually playlist music that they like and that speaks to that kind of show. So you're more likely to get your stuff playlisted through them first, and be consistent in giving them music, because sometimes it becomes difficult to put together a DJ Sabi's African boombox or a Sunday social that I used to do on YFM and so on and so forth. And you end up leaning to people that are constantly giving you music, and those people actually end up vouching for you in these committee meetings. So I think for you to break into South Africa, look to the people with specialty radio shows. So your Nikki B's, your DJ Sabis, who else? There's something called Sundays on Y or something like that. So they've got something specialty happening. And so look for specialty radio shows, because those guys will play your music in a heartbeat.
That's playing out, how that's playing out in an African context, because you know with radio, there's systems for getting paid, but now there's music podcasts that will play music. So how is that working out? And secondly, I just wanted to find out if you guys have any insights about the podcasting industry in South Africa and the rest of the continent. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so the reason why I haven't started podcasting is basically because of music rights. I'm a music guy. I love music radio, and the fact that I'm still barred by what I can put on YouTube and who the owner is and so on and so forth has hindered me from starting the kind of podcast that I want. But that is slowly changing. They're trying to ease the regulations around that, because there's value in your song being listened to by a person that is your fan, or somebody that is creating an entity where your kind of sound is going to live, you know? So yeah, just keep your ear, just keep your ear on the ground. I think it's going to change, because it's a win-win situation.
Yeah, I have a podcast, but it's about music. So what I do is I have an artist on the podcast, and what I make sure I do is to feed a lot of their content straight direct to wherever you can buy their music. So what I act as a marketing platform on your behalf, so that you can get your payments, because I know that we're not licensed to play music like that, so that you can get paid as an artist. So that's why my platform, what I do is I just act as a marketing platform on your behalf, feed your links, then people can directly purchase your music straight to you. That's what I do.
Yeah, and not to add to anything, but for example, indeed, legislation hasn't quite caught up and isn't exactly accommodating podcasters yet. At ASE, we have the Academy of Sound Engineering. We have a podcast platform for students, and it's music podcasts for the most part. However, these are unsigned artists. A lot of them are, in fact, students themselves or peers of these students or up-and-coming unsigned artists. We do so with their permission. We need to get permission beforehand. Are you okay with us playing your music knowing that you will not be getting paid? That is cleared beforehand, and then we go ahead and produce the podcast. But if you are talking about, especially if these are signed artists, be it to major or indies, that can get rather complicated. The waters can get murky. I know with Apple Music Radio, interestingly enough, a cousin of mine gets playlisted there often. They do send a contract where he has to sign acknowledgement that there will be no remuneration for the playlisting of your music, etc. I guess what they're selling is exposure, and they can, because they have an incredibly sizable audience and big platform.
Okay, I think we need to be done. They've been telling me our time is up, unfortunately. I'd like to thank you one more time for joining us on this conversation. We hope that you had a good time with us. We had a good time with you guys. And we'd like to thank Africa Rising Music Conference for having us, and Paradise Music as well. Otherwise, for now, this is us saying cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.